Once upon a time in a town called Oja, the girls were something else. Beautiful, confident, and always dressed like queens. Almost every girl had 2 or 3 boyfriends. They wanted to look rich, and that needed money. To them, having just one boyfriend wasn't enough. Among all these girls, Ijeoma stood out like a rainbow in the sky. She was the kind of beauty that made heads turn. Her skin shone like the morning sun, her eyes sparkled like stars, and her smile could light up a room. When Ijeoma walked, it was like music. Her hips swayed, and her steps were bold, like someone dancing to the rhythm of her own song. Men always stopped to look at her twice, some even thrice. Ijeoma had a boyfriend named Kalu. Kalo wasn't like the rich men in Oja Town, but he was kind and hardworking, but also very hot-tempered. He ran a small bar where people came to drink and laugh after a long day. Kalu loved Ijeoma with all his heart. He would share the last piece of meat in his soup with her, always making sure she was happy. They lived together in a small house behind the bar. At night, Ijeoma would sometimes come to help Kalu serve customers, her pretty face drawing more people to the bar. But there was one thing about Ijeoma that made Kalu sad: her love for expensive things. Ijeoma always wanted more. She wanted new clothes, shoes, wigs, and bags like the other girls in the town. Kalu, she would say, look at me. Don't I deserve better? Why can't you buy me those beautiful things? Kalu would sigh and say, Ijeoma, I'll get them for you one day. Just be patient. But in his heart, he knew it wasn't easy. He wasn't rich, and his bar didn't make much money. Still, he tried his best because he loved her. But Ijeoma's heart wasn't satisfied. She wanted more, and that's where the trouble began. Ijeoma had a friend named Samiat, but everyone called her Samy. Samy was the kind of girl who turned heads, just like Ijeoma, but in a different way. She was tall and slim, with skin that shone like polished gold, and hair that fell like a black waterfall down her back. Samy always had the latest wigs, the most beautiful shoes, and clothes that made her look like she just stepped out of a big city. Samy didn't struggle like Ijeoma. If she wanted something, she snapped her fingers, and it was hers. Her family was well off, and she had men lining up to spoil her with gifts. Ijeoma often visited Samy, not just because they were friends, but because she admired Samy's life. Samy's room looked like a shop filled with everything Ijeoma could only dream of. Colorful wigs, shiny jewelry, bags in every color, and shoes that sparkled like diamonds. One sunny afternoon, Ijeoma sat on Samy's soft bed, her eyes fixed on a golden wig lying on the table. She sighed deeply, her shoulders heavy with sadness. Samy, Ijeoma began, her voice low. I don't know what to do anymore. I want wigs like these, beautiful dresses, and jewelry that shines. But Kalu can't afford them. I don't even know if he tries. Samy tilted her head, looking at Ijeoma with sharp eyes. Ijeoma, she said, you're too beautiful to live like this. Look at yourself. You deserve to live like a queen, not someone waiting for scraps. Ijeoma shook her head, her heart caught in 2 places. I love Kalu Samy. He's good to me. I can't cheat on him. I can't do that to him. Samy laughed softly, shaking her head. Ijeoma, love doesn't buy wigs. Love doesn't buy shoes or fill your belly. Think about it. Almost every girl in Oja has more than one man. Why are you the only one holding yourself back? Ijeoma didn't know what to say. Her heart felt heavy, and her mind was filled with questions. Samy sighed and stood up. She walked to her wardrobe, pulling out a golden wig, a few dresses, and a beautiful bag. She placed them in Ijeoma's hands. "Take these," Samy said. "Don't return them, but think about what I've told you. You can't live like this forever." Ijeoma's eyes lit up as she held the gifts. "Thank you, Samy," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. But deep inside, she still felt empty. The gifts were beautiful, but they weren't enough. Something was missing, and she didn't know what to do. As she walked home that day, her mind spun with Samy's words, planting seeds that would soon grow into something dangerous. Days turned into nights, but Ijeoma's heart stayed restless. The wig Samy gave her looked beautiful. The dresses made her feel special, but they weren't enough. Her eyes wandered to the other girls in Oja Town. Girls draped in shining jewelry, holding bags so fine they looked like treasures, walking with confidence like queens. Ijeoma wanted that life. The gifts from Samy felt like drops of water in a desert. Her thirst for more was growing. One evening, Ijeoma returned to Samy's house, her steps heavy, but her mind made up. Samy sat on her bed, painting her nails the color of roses. Ijeoma stood in the doorway for a moment before speaking. "Samy," she said softly, "I'm ready." Samy looked up and smiled, her face lighting up like the sun breaking through clouds. "I knew you'd come around," she said, putting her nail polish down. "Sit down, Ijeoma. Let me tell you about Chief Okafo." Samy's voice was smooth, her words dripping with excitement. "Chief Okafo is one of the wealthiest men in Oja. He has lands, cars, and money that never ends. He takes care of his women like they're queens. If you're with him, you'll never lack anything." Ijeoma's eyes widened. "But what does he want from me?" she asked, her voice trembling. Samy laughed softly. "What do you think? He wants your time, Ijeoma. He wants your beauty, and he's willing to pay for it." The words hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Ijeoma hesitated, her heart racing, but the thought of the life Samy described was too sweet to resist. "Okay," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Samy wasted no time. The next day, she took Ijeoma to meet Chief Okafo. The chief was a man of power, his presence filling the room like a roaring fire. His clothes were fine, his jewelry glittered like stars, and his smile was as smooth as melted butter. He looked at Ijeoma, his eyes sweeping over her like she was a prize. "Ijeoma," he said, his voice deep and commanding, "you are beautiful, and I can see you deserve the best. Stay with me, and I'll give you everything you want. Gold, dresses, trips to the finest places, whatever your heart desires." Ijeoma nodded, her mind spinning with dreams of a new life. She began sneaking out at night to meet Chief Okafo, leaving Kalo at home. The chief spoiled her with gifts, golden necklaces, shiny bracelets, and dresses that sparkled like sunlight on water. He took her to expensive restaurants where the food was as rich as the people eating it. At home, Kalu waited, his heart heavy with worry. Ijeoma stopped helping him at the bar. She became distant, her laughter fading, her love slipping through his fingers like sand. But Kalu didn't know the full story yet. Ijeoma, lost in the sweetness of her new life, didn't realize she was walking deeper into a trap, one that would soon snap shut, leaving no way out. One night, as they ate dinner, Kalu watched her closely. "Ijeoma," he said softly, "where have you been going? You're not the same anymore." Ijeoma didn't meet his eyes. "I've just been visiting Samy," she replied, her voice flat. But Kalu's heart whispered to him that she wasn't telling the truth. Days turned into nights, and Ijeoma's sneaking out became more frequent. Kalu felt like a man losing grip on a rope. the love he held so dearly slipping away. One night, as the moon hung high like a watchful eye, Kalu made up his mind. He would follow her. He waited in the shadows, his breath quiet, his heart pounding like a drum. Ijeoma left the house, her steps light, unaware that Kalu was behind her. He followed her through the winding streets of Oja Town until she stopped in front of a grand mansion. Kalu's heart sank. The mansion's gates swung open, and Ijeoma stepped inside. Kalu watched as she disappeared into the house, the glow of the mansion's lights swallowing her like a hungry beast. He didn't need to see more. His heart broke into pieces sharp enough to cut through his soul. When Ijeoma returned home that night, Kalu was waiting. His face was dark, his eyes heavy with pain. "Ijeoma," he said, his voice trembling, "why are you doing this to me? I loved you. I gave you everything I had." Ijeoma's face was cold, her eyes hard. "What do you have to give me, Kalu?" she said, her voice sharp like the edge of a knife. "Chief Okafo treats me like a queen. He gives me what you never could." The night was silent, but Kalu's heart roared with the sound of revenge. That night, sleep refused to visit Kalu. He lay on his mat, staring at the ceiling, as the fire of betrayal burned in his chest. His mind played Ijeoma's words over and over, each one cutting him like a blade. "What do you have to offer me, Kalu? Chief Okafo treats me like a queen." Kalu's fists clenched, his teeth grinding together. "Ijeoma," he whispered, his voice filled with pain and rage. "You will regret ever knowing me. You played with my heart, and now you will pay." The hours passed slowly, but Kalu's anger only grew. His love for Ijeoma, once soft and tender, had turned into something cold and sharp. He didn't want her to just leave. He wanted her to feel the same pain she had caused him. The thought of her laughter with Chief Okafo, the gifts she flaunted, and the love she threw away made his chest ache. Kalu sat up as an idea began to form in his mind. His face was hard, his heart no longer beating with love, but with the rhythm of revenge. "She thinks she's better than me," he muttered. "Let her see what my hands can do." Quietly, Kalu began to gather what he needed. He moved like a shadow, his steps light but filled with purpose. Pots clanged softly, spices were measured carefully, and the fire crackled in the corner of his kitchen. Kalu worked with precision, his mind focused on one thing, making a meal Ijeoma would never forget. As the first rays of dawn touched Oja Town, Kalu's preparations were complete. He looked at the ingredients before him, his lips curling into a grim smile. "Ijeoma," he whispered, his voice cold as the morning air, "this will be your last supper." The town was quiet, but inside Kalu's small house, the storm of his heart raged on, feeding the dark plan that would soon change everything. Just a few days later, Kalu stood outside his house, his face calm, but his heart stormy. He called out to Ijeoma, who was passing by, her steps light and proud. "Ijeoma," he said softly, forcing a smile onto his face. "Can we talk?" Ijeoma stopped, one hand resting on her hip, her eyes narrowing. "What do you want, Kalu?" she asked, her tone sharp. Kalu looked at her with eyes full of false kindness. "I just want us to have one last dinner together. No fights, no arguments. Just you and me, like old times." Ijeoma tilted her head, her lips curling into a smirk. "One last meal," she said, her voice dripping with mockery. "Fine, I'll come. Just don't waste my time." That evening, Kalu's house looked different. The table was set with care, plates shining, candles flickering softly, and the smell of rich spices floating in the air. Kalu had prepared everything perfectly, his movements quiet and steady, his face a mask, hiding the anger boiling within. When Ijeoma arrived, she was dressed in one of the gowns Chief Okafo had bought her, the fabric shimmering like gold under the soft candlelight. She walked in, her steps confident, her chin high. She said, looking around. You're trying too hard, Kalu. Kalu didn't reply. He only smiled and gestured for her to sit. Ijeoma sat down, crossing her legs gracefully, her eyes fixed on her reflection in the window. She didn't notice Kalu watching her, his eyes dark and distant. Kalu poured her a drink, his hand steady. Here, he said softly. Let's toast to old times. Ijeoma took the drink without a second thought, too busy admiring the way her dress sparkled under the light. Kalu's silence didn't bother her. She was too full of herself to notice the storm brewing in his heart. Kalu stood still, his eyes fixed on her, his face unreadable. Drink up, he said softly, his voice steady. Tonight is special. What Ijeoma didn't know was that the drink in her hand carried something more than sweetness. Kalu had poisoned it, his plan carefully crafted, his heart hardened by her betrayal. Ijeoma took another sip, the liquid sliding easily down her throat. But then something changed. Her head felt heavy, her arms weak. She blinked, confused, as the world around her began to blur. Kalu, she muttered, her voice faint. What's happening? Kalu stepped closer, his shadow growing tall in the flickering candlelight. You laughed at my love, he said, his tone calm but cold. You threw my heart away like it was nothing. Now, Ijeoma, you'll see what your actions have brought you. Ijeoma tried to move, but her body betrayed her. She was frozen, her limbs heavy like stones. Panic filled her eyes, but no words came from her lips. Kalu walked to the corner of the room, where his tools lay waiting, a sharp knife, a heavy cutlass, and a small axe. He picked them up one by one, his hand steady, his heart cold. The room was silent except for the faint bubbling of the pot in the kitchen. You thought you could betray me and walk away? Kalu said, his voice quiet but firm. Tonight, you'll pay for every tear you made me shed. With no hesitation, Kalu approached Ijeoma. Her eyes widened, her body trembling, but she couldn't move. She could only watch in horror as Kalu raised the knife. One by one, he began to cut her, as if she were a piece of beef to be prepared. The knife glided through her skin, the cutlass fell with precision, and the small axe struck where needed. Blood stained the floor, and the once sweet aroma of the house turned bitter and heavy. Kalu walked silently, his movements calm and calculated, as if each cut was a release for the pain in his heart. Ijeoma's presence faded from the room, her beauty reduced to pieces on the cold floor. The pot in the kitchen continued to bubble, its sound the only witness to the dark act that had unfolded. By the time Kalo was done, the night had grown darker, and the man who once loved Ijeoma now stood alone, surrounded by silence and shadows. The very next day, Kalu worked with an eerie calmness at his bar. The soup he had prepared the night before simmered in a large pot, its aroma inviting and rich. That morning, Kalu invited a few of his close friends over. Come, he said, forcing a smile. I've prepared something special for you. His friends arrived, laughing and joking, their spirits high. The soup was served, steaming hot. Its smell, so delicious, it made their mouths water. One by one, they tasted it, their eyes lighting up with delight. Kalu! One of them exclaimed, licking his lips. This is the best soup I've ever tasted. Another friend nodded, his spoon already deep in the bowl. You've outdone yourself, he said. What's in it? It's so rich, so tender. Kalu said nothing. He only watched, his face blank, his heart as cold as the steel of the knife he had used the night before. Their friends ate heartily, their bowls emptying quickly. Some even asked for more. "Kalu, you must teach us this recipe," one said, laughing. "This is the kind of soup that makes people come back for more." But Kalu didn't laugh. He didn't speak. His eyes carried a darkness that no one noticed, their joy blinding them to the truth. By the end of the meal, Kalo excused himself, stepping outside without a word. The bar was filled with laughter, but Kalu's heart felt heavy. He knew he wouldn't return. That night, he vanished from Oja Town, leaving behind a secret that would soon unravel. Days passed, and whispers began to fill the air. Ijeoma was nowhere to be seen. Her friends knocked on her door, called her name in the streets, and even searched the markets, but she was gone. Where could she be? They wondered aloud. She would never leave without telling us. Soon, a foul smell began to drift through the town. It came from Kalu's house, creeping out like a dark secret refusing to stay hidden. Curious and concerned, a group of townspeople decided to investigate. When they entered Kalu's kitchen, the sight that greeted them froze them in their tracks. Ijeoma's remains were scattered across the room. Bones, blood, and scraps of her once beautiful self lay on the floor like a broken puzzle. The air was thick with the stench of death, and the walls seemed to whisper of the horrors that had unfolded. On the table, they found a note. Kalu's handwriting was shaky but clear, his words cutting through the silence like a knife. "To the people of Oja, Ijeoma betrayed my love, and for that she paid the price. Greed and betrayal have no place here. Let this be a lesson to you all. Kalu." The townspeople screamed, some running out of the house, their hearts pounding with fear and disgust. The story of Ijeoma's fate spread like wildfire, carried on the lips of horrified townspeople. What kind of man could do such a thing? They asked, their voices trembling. How could he serve us her flesh in his soup? The once lively town of Oja was now a place of fear and silence. Kalu's act had left a scar that would never heal. Oja Town would never forget the tale of Ijeoma and Kalu. Her beauty, once celebrated, was now a warning. Elders began telling the story to young girls as a lesson about greed and betrayal. They would sit under the baobab tree, their voices low and serious as they said, Ijeoma's beauty was her pride, but her greed was her downfall. She wanted more than her hands could hold, and it led her to her death. Fathers warned their sons about the dangers of blind love. Do not give your heart to someone who does not value it, they said. Kalu's love for Ijeoma turned to rage, and it destroyed them both. The story of Ijeoma and Kalu became a cautionary tale, passed down from one generation to the next. It was whispered in hushed tones, told by mothers to their daughters, and remembered every time the aroma of soup filled the air. And so, Oja Town moved on, but the memory of that dark tale lingered, a shadow that never truly left, reminding everyone of the cost of greed and betrayal. I hope you enjoyed the tale. If so, please like the video, share it with your family and friends, comment on it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell for more enchanting tales like this one. Goodbye.